thanks for everyone for coming. And as we discussed with the others, like first I'm going to introduce this project briefly, and I'm going to explain how Alejandra and how Esteban, where should I put this, how Alejandra and Esteban came into the picture, and why we started to work together with Esteban, and why Alejandra is invited into this conversation. So let me give some answers to that. But first, what is this project? Okay, so in 2017 and 2018, I've been working with a group of women, around 200 women from Veracruz, who've been looking for their disappeared relatives in the state of Veracruz. The disappearances basically are due to like a social cleansing in the area, which happened like quite recently between, tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm telling something wrong, like between 2014 and 16, 17. So it was like a short period of time with a very big number of forced disappearances, how it's called. And supposedly, and not just supposedly, mainly it was, how I said, it was like a social cleansing made or happened by the joint forces of, hello, please take a seat, of military, police, and all these political like turbulences. Okay, so how Esteban came in the picture, and what we've been trying to do here. So during this 1 year, I mean, this project became very long, and it was like quite doubting to me as well. So I created a lot of archives and a lot of sound recordings on the fields, like how I imagined this project to be. Like I imagined people more accessible, but it was not the case. So everything like became like quite wide and long in terms of this like creating relations with the locals. So I got to have, as I said, a lot of archives and a lot of sound. And I didn't really know what to do either with the archives and either with the sound after a while. And when I came home after this project, I frequently bumped into Esteban, and we started to talk about that, like how he remembers Veracruz, because as a kid he's been spending a lot of time over there, and he kept saying to me like he does not want to look at this project actually, because like it's quite painful to him. And it was in 2018. Yeah, so recently we started to talk about this thing again, what to do with the situation, and this is how we ended up here. And Alejandra, yeah, I think we have met in Mexico like in 2016, as I remember, in Ciudad Juarez, and she was part of a workshop program, but I was organizing with another friend of mine. And why Alejandra is here, because I think she has like such an understanding of this, as a local, as a Mexican, she has such an understanding of these complexities of those realities, but I'm not really able to explain, and she is just much better in that. And also, if like anyone wants to understand deeper these contexts, like she is the one who is going to be able to do these questions like very well.
Okay.
I'm not a good talker. Like.
No. That's great. That's great.
Okay. So, yeah, and with this work, as a photographer, I have had like many questions because, as I said, it was a very long-term project at the end, and I really went into that reality what I was trying to explain for the outsiders. But like, I was already so normalized actually to that sort of violence and that sort of environment that many things what I've been taking pictures of, they've been already very natural to me. But when this work it came back to Europe, like there was no like a common ground for many to understand what I'm talking about. So it was also a little confusion with this work, how to put it, how to present it, and what are the links between these two words for Europeans to understand it, and you know, these been also questions, and yeah, basically. So it's partly also the question of the role of the photographer and how to present it. If I am not like, you know, I'm in the art sector. I'm not working for newspapers. I don't have like instant access for for many people. So it's like a niche kind of sector what I'm trying to achieve. And there are many questions how to reach it with these kind of topics. So these been just like some questions and some points what we try to discuss, but I think it was enough from me. And yeah, there is this text what Alejandra brought us. I mean brought of the exhibition, and it's over there printed. So if you have time to go it through meanwhile, it also could be maybe helpful. But so how shall we start the real discussion?
Well, I have a question before starting to speak myself, because I speak a lot. But what was your initial interest in talking about these issues, and how did, for example, the experience in Juarez and the work that you had done before along the border and the earlier work which I refer to here, like how did you went from there to this, and how do you think it changed your perspective on how you were approaching Mexico's reality as a foreigner?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that like these things, working on this project and ending up in Veracruz, it also like it was part of my personal life, obviously, because at the beginning I was really a foreigner, but at the end I've been living there for like 5 or 6 years already. So also during this time, not only projects have been happening to me, but also my personal life. So at the beginning, for me, this more like violent and rough reality was more distant to me. But more and more I was living there, more and more it touched me like on a personal level, and also as a woman. And I cannot deny that this is what pushed me to that direction, to work with women and being interested in women's work and women's power, because I was also hurt in that sense, like on my personal life.
And how do you think the work shifted from your initial perspective on the earliest work?
I think that was the answer. Like I became just more involved and just as a person myself, not only as a photographer, and also I wanted to show like a different part of this reality. I didn't feel to objectify people that much as I was doing it at the beginning. That also did have a purpose, to make them like it's not nice word, like objectifying them, because I was not doing that. It was like more like a rough sector of the reality, but without my emotions, I would say. It was just like my perception, my raw perception of what I was trying to talk about, like according to religion, or at the beginning about masquerades.
About faith. Well, I think I asked Adél this question because for me it's a very good example of how precisely the deeper understanding of the culture and the involvement within the culture pretty much changed Adél's work and perspective. And for me, it's a very valuable experience to also not only see it in her work, but also because I was there very close to her during these years. We met in Ciudad Juárez, another place that has a very rough history with violence. I grew up there, and the embodiment of that reality, you know. So I had a lot of questions when I met Adél. As you can read in the text, Adél arrived to Mexico, well, in early 2013, but by the time I got to meet her, I was just finishing my bachelor's in arts, and I had just wrote this thesis, sort of essay, and we were all immersed in these conversations about how violence was being represented and how violence was spoken about in the media, and by not only local, national, and international, not only news media, you know, like photojournalism, but also art in other languages, you know, films as well. So I think she arrived in a moment where all this conversation was at a very high point. So, for example, myself and other artists in Ciudad Juárez, like I had always refused to be a fixer. Like I didn't want to sort of make a profit from giving a very dark tour of my city, you know, because most photojournalists go there, or photographers and artists looking for something, and they want to see it and find it. Some of them look at my pictures and then they literally say, take me there where you took that picture. And from the beginning, the way that Adél interacted for me was very different.
Sorry, just one thing, like maybe there is someone who doesn't know what a fixer is.
Okay, a fixer in Mexico's context, I don't know if in other countries, obviously, well, maybe that's a whole part of the economy of images in Mexico and Latin America. A fixer is someone that you hire when you go to a place. This is usually word to word. It's not like you can find it on the internet, or I mean on the announcement that this is a fixer, but someone tells you, okay, look for that person, she will give you a tour, drive you around, take you places, and we'll let you know everything you need to know about this subject, you know? So I started as my work started to be known, many photographers were approaching to me to look for, so I can show them around and tell them pretty much, give them what they're looking for, because most of people come with a very preconceived idea of what they want to show and photograph. But the way that I met Adél was in the sort of opposite way. Adél was working on a project along the border, and she and Erin, who was a New Zealander photographer she was working with, were given workshops. And just about the moment that we were having this conversation about what we call symbolical as extractivism, you know, you go, take something, take images, go away, and then you just forget about the community and you capitalize on it and you are out of there. Well, Adél and Erin were given these workshops, I don't know if I'm wrong, but just clarify, please, to approach the community in a different way, to give something in return and to leave something in the community, not just take the images and go. And honestly, for me, and I've told this Adél before, but my project La Guerra, which is a project I made also about this very high period of violence in Ciudad Juárez, with photos from my archive between 2008 and 2012, were photos that I had not found any value in until in one of the exercises during the workshop, I show you the diptychs that I was doing, and you were like, these are great. There's something here. And now, she encouraged me to put together this series, which for me is very important. And then later, when I saw her working on Veracruz, I saw that same perspective being come to life within her own work, you know? I do believe this project has, in terms on its aesthetic qualities, a different way of approaching violence because of three important things. I mean, because we can say representation, we can talk about these abstract things, but how do we actually put into images or other media these realities, right?
Can I just ask something? I think it's like super, amazing that you guys talk about this. And Adél, you were saying that you had like a really, like it was a really long project and you have been collecting these images. But how does this archive looks like generally, and how did you decide to put these images out here, or can you just explain that as well, like within this exhibition?
Yeah, so it's very unfortunate that you cannot see the archive, which is right in the telephone, which is the main piece of the exhibition. Yeah. So, yeah, please. So, actually, it's a selection from like thousands of images which I've been shooting on film, like a very small, like Olympus MGU. No, mainly. So, what was the question? The archive.
Yeah, like general. No, I haven't been on the opening. Like I just
No.
some things now. What's happening? That you're saying that you collaborated, but like what happened within this archive, like now that you I don't know, put that picture or like print it over there, and this, like what was the process? Why you decided to, I don't know, like to explain the story this way, like.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Like don't ever.
No. Én csak lámpalázas vagyok, tehát azért vagyok ilyen. No, so like the main idea was that like from this series, like I don't know, there are some exhibition prints or like more common pictures what people got to know, but like many of the archives which are, I think, are very valuable, like in this big amounts, to tell this story that they would have been shown. And this is the way what we figured to show, because actually on the wall you can see one picture, and also in the archive you can find it at a point, that this group, the El Solecito, the Veracruz, this group was created through a WhatsApp group, actually, and this is how they formed like a community. And there is another important part that they've been doing an excavation process on a field where my entry was denied. So usually, or like mainly, the information was passed to me like through these pictures what they've been showing to me on their phones, like as they are excavating the field and how they are looking for bodies. No, so that's why we decided to put the archive into the telephone, and this is how we are passing the information to you. Yep. So. Yeah.
And this, my part in it was, so when you pick up the phone, the phone is laying down and the space is passive, but when you pick up the phone, the environmental sound starts, and you kind of like open low pass gate and everything starts swirling around. We're working with 4 channels, so it's very much of an ambience soundscape. And yeah, everything is like all the it's from all of Adél's archive, like the sound recordings she has from like interviews, from a field recordings from Veracruz and everything. So yeah, when Adél and I were talking about this show, we had the different iterations about it. We had different ideas. One of them, or like the base concept, was to have like an empty space that would be activated whenever you came into contact with the archive. And this is like the current state of it through a telephone. And yeah.
And also there are some more voice informations in that video, what you can see over there. And because Esteban was using more like ambiental sounds, which are just like giving you like an idea how Veracruz sounds, because the sound is like a super important part of that reality as well. But there you can hear the whole interviews, like, and also with subtitles. So that one is more informative, like information-wise.
Should I continue?
Yeah, please.
Well, and precisely this, I think this approach to the exhibition as an archive, this is what I do believe that is a very important achievement in the way that first, how she decided to photograph this reality. There's a very specific technique she uses, which is a point and shoot camera, right? The elements she decided to shoot, to photograph, like the phones, like I do believe Adél, most photojournalists, when they go explore this was one of the earliest groups that was doing, I don't know if you see that stick that they put into earth. They were the first one to use this technique, right? Or one of the first groups in Mexico to use it to find a human or remains underneath the earth. And most photojournalists are looking for that. And these decisions that Adél had to do as her work went through, you know, she decides, okay, I cannot go to the actual place because some of these groups are so tired of photojournalists that they just put up a scene for photographers to go and photograph, you know? So they're like, oh yeah, just take him to there because they are just overwhelmed with so many people, right? So these decisions like deciding that the picture of the phone itself is the way to sort of approach, and then the portraits of the ladies and then the landscapes, all these elements together not only convey the context that this violence is under which this violence is happening in Veracruz, but now within this exhibition, and just talking to Esteban about his very particular experiences of Veracruz, it makes a lot of sense of the sounds that you decide to incorporate, right? To give that sort of equilibrium between the harshness of the subject matter and these other like experiences of the landscape, you know, more contemplative, where it's also at the same time what is very difficult to explain about Mexico's relationship to violence is that at the same time that this is very real and it is happening, there's also life and resistance in these families, and there's women that you are seeing in these photographies and in the landscape exemplify how they are resisting to a war that is not necessarily a drug trafficking war, but it's more a war on the control of territories for their exploitation and for the control of routes for all types of merchandise. And that the infrastructure that you also see in these photographs, in this archive, an archive of an experience about violence in Mexico, all together, I do believe, conform a very round, full understanding of how all this intersects, you know? I don't know if I'm making sense. I mean, the bounty of the landscape is there because it is bountiful. It is such a fertile land, Veracruz. That's why it needs to be controlled because it is valuable in that sense. And drug trafficking, violence, disappearance, and all these complexities have been instrumentalized by governments and power groups in Mexico to acquire control and subjugation of communities. So these women are resisting making a community, even if it is to look for the remains of their dead ones. And at the same time, there's a landscape there that reminds us why this land is so valuable. And that's pretty much my interpretation, Adél, of your work, and especially of how you decided to pretty much took a U-turn from what you were doing in order to acquire something more more significant and more in-depth, which exemplifies your own experience. I mean, this is the result of experiencing culture and reality in a more closer way than just going to see it, you know?
Yeah, and I have to say it was like also a necessity to make like a turn at a point, because of course I have my instincts, and I want to keep distance from some certain things what I know that can hurt me or whatever. But in this case, the access was denied, how I said, to enter the mass grave, where it would have been way more easy just to be there for some certain point, certain time, and to take pictures, no? But in this way, like, I've been spending like weeks and weeks with these ladies, and I was very keen to enter the space. So I ended up like doing the same routine and to do the same route to the gate of the mass grave. Like every day, I went there walking with them. I was waiting to get in. I was waiting for them to come out, and you know, like all these days been passing the same way. One day, actually, they could get me in, but that was like an illegal entrancing, and that was the only time when I have seen the actual space. So in this way, I was forced into this reality to experience it, and you know, like what to do. Like I was looking for things to take pictures of, and I was trying to make sense of all this space, which been there like around me, like, you know, just for like forever times during I was waiting for them and during we've been walking. And yeah, so it's like a very everyday experience of like this sort of environment and this sort of like very suffocating something, where you have like a lot of death, like, you know, a tropical bounty space, and yeah. But also
Humidity.
Oh yeah, Veracruz has the very same weather as we do have now, or even like worse, much worse.
I mean, I've been going to Veracruz since I'm like 3 months old. It's really like a beautiful, beautiful place. And this was one of the main things that gave me a little bit of a distance to Adél's work. She's a really dear friend for a really long time. But even when she exhibited this video, I would just like come around, but I wouldn't really go into the exhibition and stuff, because I was also trying to keep a distance from, let's say, like a reality that many people do suffer. But my personal experience with Veracruz, has always been, you know, like it's like a magic town. It's a really, really beautiful place. They say that if you swear and spit it into the ground, like a tree of bad words is going to grow, because it's like so fertile. It's like really, really beautiful. And of course, the people are like the cliche of saying that Mexican people are like super warm and loving. It's entirely true. And this whole situation that kind of has the country in a turmoil is I guess the greediness from people on the top and just like having like the not necessarily just like hunger in the stomach, but like hunger for some sort of I guess like a definition of life or something else that has the people in that way. And somehow when Adele and I were starting to talk about what to do together, I would still, like when I would listen to some of her recordings, I would like light an incense and, like, okay, let's listen to it or whatever, because it's just, it is a very harsh reality that it's in parallel with the beauty of Mexico in many ways. I mean, yeah.
And I didn't understand that at the beginning. Remember, I asked you during the exhibition that why I was trying to look for some correlation between the images and the sound. Mm-hmm. And I asked you when I saw one of the images of a protest. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember this, but I mean, I myself, I am too mediated. Two things I always notice that comes from the very closer experience within these places through activism is that we always prioritize the testimony of these people, right? And I was wondering that when we were in this exhibition, but now after just this brief conversation with you, I do believe that it's important to, before a testimony that is very real and that it just occupies so much space within a whole project, to also give that space to the sort of calmness and beauty that this reality is erupting into, right? So in that sense, I do think the way you guys decided to collaborate, I mean, it's just my opinion, but I do believe that's important to prioritize life within these realities.
100%. And also one of the things is that I believe El Solecito de Veracruz, like it's called like Napochka, like Veracruz Naka Kichi Napochka, or like that would be something like that. So that group, I mean, I can't say 100% sure, but I'm quite confident that they would be happy about somehow Adele's view, or like somehow like whatever they're doing to resonate somewhere else, and then maybe it's not that it's gonna actually help them in any ways, but it's actually gonna empower their voice to be heard louder. And if it's gonna help or not, of course, it's just really tacit in this way. But I think it's really important to say that we're not doing this because of a morbo. How do you say, like it's not like to show what's happening there in a morbid way. Of course, it's a very different approach, and I think this was one of the main reasons why we decided to put this show together. Or I decided to jump kind of like supporting Adele in her view, because this is how I envision my role in this exhibition, is rather supporting your view than kind of like showing mine.
And now that you mentioned it, that many times the interviews and the testimonies are taking up much space, like much time. Like actually, that was one of the turning points when we started to make these interviews. And the people, like I've been doing it with a very dear friend, Pedro, and he had a very good ability to make people comfortable, no? And like after a while, these women became like very comfortable with us, and also they opened in a very different way. And they started to explain the situations not only with like these numbers, like okay, when my relative got disappeared, or like the certain space and time and whatever happened by their knowledge. But they started to explain their emotions with the scapes of the land, like with birds and trees and light and darkness and sky, whatever God, like with a very like universal metaphors, but is all understandable for all of us, no? So for me, like that was also like a point when it became like a little bit softer, like all this project. So there was not that big wall anymore, like just with these datas. It became like, yeah, something more approachable.
Poetic,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think sometimes when you have like the formalized like photojournalism, then victims become numbers, and it just becomes part of a statistic. And I think the view that you're trying to show here is a bit more like personal. It's more like up and close to the actual person, and like, I don't know, like to their hands, not too much to, you know. And I think it's a good peaking point into the situation, into a horrible situation.
I mean, and for a journalism, I think I mentioned it in the text. I mean, we have to remember that photojournalism, or there's an economy of images, and all these images are circulating either on the internet or in different spaces in the world. But at the same time that it's important to talk about them, the very specifics of the aesthetics for me also contain a very important message. Most photo and even artistic projects about this sort of subject in Mexico, there's a bit of an spectacularization about it. I mean, you can either see literally a pieta, you know, in a very dramatic, it almost reminds me of of some sort of paintings sometimes that are looking to dramatize the images of already very tragic situations. And I go back to the idea, with this idea I had not really quite understood until I saw this exhibition, the little gestures of the tape, the phone, and to understand it as an archive rather than just a photo series that tells you a story. Rather, I mean, for me, an archive is important because it does reminds us that there's a very real documented quality of this work. I mean, you do not take or detach the subject matter from its reality, but at the same time, in an archive, I mean like a family archive, like a photo album, like something that it's that close, even in the aesthetic, on the way she shoots, you know? And in that way, when you put together all these elements, you are taking and putting into a whole nother conversation the aesthetics of, I mean, the question of how do we represent or talk about violence, you know, which is at the core of many studies in Mexico and regarding this subject. So for me, all these elements are a response to that question, you know. And I mean, Adél is part of a big group of artists who are trying to make sense of this reality in Mexico, not only because we're close or have been close to this, but because the same way tragedies in other places require certain pressure from an international community, I do view Adél and other artists who, I mean, take the time to subvert the language as these bridges that help understand our context in other places in its complexity, right?
Do you think that besides like a dramatization, like Hollywood usage of Mexico, like is there like big international attention trying to change the situation in Mexico or to help?
I mean, Mexican violence with the use of media, you know, like this show Narcos, there's this idea that we are intrinsically violent, that this is just attached to culture, that this is just how Mexico is, But this is why I also find important to always politicize this message, because this is not just the way we are. Of course, Mexico is dealing with post-colonial issues regarding land disputes. Land disputes are as old as colonialism, But also, and I mentioned it at the beginning of the text, there was an agreement between Mexico and the United States in 2006 called the Plan Merida. And it was a plan in this whole campaign the US has done since the 1980s against a war against drugs, where Mexico made an agreement with the United States to receive support for armament, training, and resources for the army to fight against drug trafficking leaders and drug trafficking drugs, at the same time that they would provide support for health and cultural development against, say no to drugs and stuff like that. And while the US is doing this, it's happening what's happening in many other conflicts in the world. The money, the arms, the drugs, and all the economics of the war are coming from the US. The arms that these kids are being disappeared or killed with are from the USA. So this is why I always accentuate that this is a dispute. The use of narco-related violence is an instrumentalization to destabilize communities. So when you have the people putting all their life into finding their missing ones, and then you put in the media that there's this very violent community in Veracruz that is doing that to itself, you weaken enough the community to then influence policies and be able to just take and make whatever corrupt agreements to take the land and to control the land. And the US is always have in its priorities to control Mexico's geopolitical dynamics, So for me, it's very important, maybe this is just a whole nother level of the context, that you need to reach or research, that you will not get immediately with this, an exhibition like this. But for me, it's always important to politicize, because in the polarization of the issue, as well as in the poetics of it, you can go through this idea that we are just a violent country. And because there are a lot of interest put into us having to be in this conflict,
Yeah, I think also a lot of movies about us being like violent, machete wielding violent people, and I guess we are somewhat violent. I mean, I think like when the pueblo, when the people come down from the mountain, it like other revolutions or other independence have been like super violent. It was not like easy peasy. I think we are pretty rough people, but we're also like super warm. And I think the current situation is mostly flipping us into a reactive, violent state, sadly.
But just to finish it, let me tell you a little phrase by a Chicana border poet that I like very much. It says something, I can read it to you in a bit when I have internet, but it says something like, violence and exploitation creates beings that it can talk to, people in my city and probably in Veracruz, we are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. The communities are broken and we don't trust each other. We struggle to trust each other. And then you have all this spectacularization of violence in media, because at the same time, it withholds a lot of our culture, That's a whole other conversation that we can have even about narcos, corridos tumbados, and all of this, Because I do believe that, and let me just mention, Mexican president at the time that this war began, and its security, ¿cómo se llama? Garcia Luna, el jefe, el de seguridad de Calderón, el secretario de defensa. The Secretary in Defense is currently in trial in the United States. No, Garcia Luna. That was the governor of Veracruz at the time Adél was making this project.
No, he was a little bit before, no? We are talking about Duarte.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He was not anymore?
Already, no,
But he was in the run.
Is now in jail.
Yeah, like when it happened, he was running Veracruz when it was happening. When I was there, he was already gone.
He was already.
Just to put in, just really quick, just put in context. Like now, the elections that just happened, like a month ago or something like this. Like I think like 60-something candidates were murdered before they even got to the voting day. So, I mean that is a pretty violent country. I don't know if the number is correct, but even if like 2 or even like 1 candidate is murdered before they can, it's like it's scary. It's a Game of Thrones. It's like it's horrible.
I mean, that's, again, you will see it as a Game of Thrones if you don't make an effort to understand the politics of it all, right? And well, we can keep this conversation can keep going, but yeah, we can have it in another time if you want to know more about it.
What about the thing that you wanted to?
Oh no, it was just a little phrase, but I can leave it for later.
Okay.
Well, you look for it, and then you can talk about something.
Actually, I was about to ask something. Like, we've been talking about it. Okay, like this is like sort of our exhibition, but like how you are trying to make sense of the violence as a Mexican. Like for me as a foreigner, it was like I think it's always a little bit easier. It's always a bit easier. Like first, I'm like an outsider. Usually, I stay like an outsider, so it's easier to handle. But what about you?
Well, you can check out my webpage because all my projects are about trying to make sense of that, pretty much. And I mean, you met me, how I was living and how my life was in 2016, which was not the highest point of the violence in Juarez, but I was dealing with the results of it. I still deal with them, you know, mental health issues. A lot of people are suffering from mental health issues. And again, for me, it's important not to just say, oh, be careful, don't go to Mexico, you will get kidnapped. Like, how do you respond to that? Like, any of you want to go to Mexico at some point after this conversation? You do? Okay. I mean, one of the complex things about the whole thing, and I think the whole violence of it all, is that life still goes on. And there are places and there's a possibility of life, very difficult, of course, and very gentrified in other spaces where you probably will end up at because this is not because very personal decisions, but the traveling guides are designed for this, for you to end up in a very safe space, right? She was, I don't know what she was doing in my hometown, but it is not definitely in the tour guides of my country, neither these small towns of Veracruz, you know? So it's just the realities of contemporary capitalist dynamics, because it's just about merchandise. Every aspect of life is merchandise. And sometimes this is my first time in Europe, and it just seems so far away. I do feel like in a very happy bubble, you know, where everything's pretty and delicious. And I'm kind of sad that I have to go back, because I do believe everyone should have the access to a life that is beautiful and delicious and calm and peaceful. Everybody.
Exactly, and I think it's maybe the same feeling that maybe they would get when they go to Mexico, that it's like beautiful, blah blah blah. It's the same feeling that you get when you come to Budapest, because there's like this underlayer of like of bullcrap happening.
That is much more real and authentic, than the way that
Once there's like Mexico's like really violent, of course, and that is a big difference in regards to, let's say, like the shithole that Hungary can be, or like whatever it is. Yeah. But
That's not true. I got stolen in Mexico.
but I think it's not so much about like I think maybe in Mexico you would be careful about your personal safety or your belongings and blah blah blah. And I think maybe here you won't get robbed, but I think you won't want to have your children be born in Hungary to like live their life, because there won't be like any positive outcome for them, you know. And let's say like I would rather have my children be born in Mexico with all this sort of stuff than them being like growing old here, because I think overall what I can perceive from my contemporaries or from my life here is that there is a big lack of motivation of anything that you can do with your life. I mean, it's just like whatever you try, there's like a really big top, and it's very very different, of course, you know, like the violence in Mexico, but also here it's not just like a sugar bubble.
Maybe I did exaggerate a little bit, but go ahead. No. Regarding, you wanted to say something about what he said?
No, I don't
But
think
then-
so.
I mean, the sugar bubble. Did I call it sugar bubble?
Something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yes, but I mean, to have access to this quality of life, this is what I mean, you know? I mean, access to clean water, to, of course, there should be places,
There's no clean water in the pipes in Budapest.
drinkable water at least. Of course, you have all the right to question your governance, the state of things here. Of course, there's corruption. Of course, there's bigotry. Of course, there is people in need. You know, I see people, marginalized people here as well. I had to go look for them pretty much because they're not in the touristic. No, they are. They were outside the Klaus Alter pretty much every night.
Like homeless people.
Yeah, homeless people, but I mean, homeless people, it's obviously an example of marginalized people, but I'm talking of a more structural, like sort of like the ghettos or like the places where, I mean, I did see how there's inequality in Hungary. Of course I see it. It's not hard to understand that. But what I'm talking about is that the main status of life that everyone should access to, maybe we will not have clean water anymore in the world, anyone, you know, because they're pretty much, it's over, clean water, it's over. But the quality of life that I am able to have here or in Mexico City, because it is a very similar city, in regards to my hometown, or probably the hometowns the towns you see in Adél's photos, I mean, I do believe that there's a big difference, and it does make a life different. Maybe it might make you apathetic, but maybe that's what happens when you are tranquilo, when you're calm.
Yeah, I guess, you know, like
When you are not restless,
yeah, I think that there is like a very big difference regarding violence to like Ciudad Juárez and to Santander. You know, it's like it's very very different. And I mean, but Ciudad Juárez is like a really dangerous city, and compared to like, let's say, like the rest of Mexico. And you have like other places in Mexico that are also like maybe as dangerous. As you said, Mexico City is kind of like, it used to be, remember, like before 2000, it was like the dangerous part of Mexico, and now it's kind of like the calm part of Mexico City, compared to, let's say, like Morelia or like Michoacan. Like I remember like driving a lot to Morelia, and it was super calm. There was like no issues whatsoever in Michoacan, and now it's, you know, like tierra caliente. Like, you know, like it's entirely like the narcos don't care about drugs anymore. They just like deal with avocado, like it's the aguacate or avocado, and because Mexico produces like close to 40% or 30-something% of the worldwide avocado, so it's a big amount of money, especially if everybody wants it with their toast. So it's like thing.
I think my point is just regarding how neglect and infrastructure there's a correlation between neglect, infrastructure, and violence. So when you my city was created for exploitation of cheap labor. A lot of these places are also in process of industrialization, right? These women have to work in maquilas.
It was more like built for, I think, especially this city for oil.
Oil extraction from the Gulf.
Extraction.
Mm-hmm. So you will always see this correlation between marginalization, exploitation of resources, and exploitation of cheap labor. When you put together all these elements, you have the perfect recipe for kids wanting to get into drug trafficking, you know, for moms having to work all day long and not being able to see their kids all day. You know, it's just that a structural thing that that is difficult to portray. I mean, but I mean, I do believe it's here. This is why I love the photos of the kid, you know, and I need that photo before I go. The home,
Yeah, which one
the
you must-
homes, like in a very like rough way, like it's about infrastructure.
Yep. Well said. I mean, really. But I was thinking then maybe there have been some parts according to the situation in Veracruz and according to this group, what they are doing exactly. Like if you don't understand something, please just make a question, because maybe it was not very well explained at the end by me.
We're all over the
And
place. We are all over the place.
yeah, and now you have a lot of other information has been shared by Esteban and by Alejandra. So it I think it creates a very good context to have any sort of questions if you may not like I do want to end this conversation just because we're gonna end up just talking between each other.
Yeah.
And so yeah, basically the work what they are doing, and in relation to this what Alejandra just explained, this group was really a novelty actually in the group of search groups for missing relatives in Mexico. Because these searching groups, many of those do exist in Mexico, because I mean the country is full of mass graves, unfortunately. And we are talking about very recent ones, or in the past decades they have been made. So this group was able to create a certain way to excavate a field, which is supposedly the biggest mass grave area recently in Latin America. I would say the biggest recent mass grave, because of course there is the other one, for example, in the Atacama. But anyways, they are excavating this field by themselves from their own power. And from their own resources, but they are gathering for themselves by selling clothes and food or whatever they can to gather money to finance all these excavations. And these groups are doing this work usually on the weekends, because otherwise the what is the work?
They need to work.
Yeah, during the work, of course, they need to work. But this group created this other way of existing when they are paying themselves from these sellings to be able to get out from their daily job and just to be able to work on this field, because actually it was a huge grave, as I said, and they have found 300 plus remains, parts of remains already. And yeah.
And I think the government does not acknowledge this at all. So it's kind of so what happened to these 300 people that are missing, or what people? who are they? They don't they do not acknowledge that this is a situation where most of the government doesn't know.
Actually, the interesting situation with this group, I think, as it became so big and so powerful, it happened with some sort of groups in Mexico already, due to Ayotzinapa. It's been already out in the news, and this group has like a very intelligent and also well-educated leader, Lucy, who actually was founder of the group, and so she was able to create this big voice in the media, and so they've been able to change actually a lot of things already. And like the very first time when I arrived there, these ladies still been very shy when we approached them, because they've been not used to like giving interviews. Actually, it was the first one for them, etc., etc. So it was all this thing, like how public they are right now. It was also like was happening during the time when I started to work with them. So things in this way have been also changing.
And in one of her interviews, no, like Lucy was saying about the narco-estado.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe you should explain that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Lucy, like she's the leader. She's like very comfortable with interviews already, and she's been. I have a voice piece what Esteban also listened to. When Lucy was explaining like how the narco state, like the drugs state, or I don't know how to.
The relationship between narcos. When we talk about narcos, we talk about people involved in the drug trafficking related organizations, right? But just as a parenthesis, before we just assume that there's a narco state, we must understand that because it is an economic reality where it's not only drugs being trafficked, but aguacates, avocados, and people and women, and it's in all levels of society. So it's not like you have the gangs and the bad guys here. You have the gangs, which are like the soldiers of the most precarized, and then you have community leaders, businessmen, governance at all levels of government, army. Like a lot of people are involved here because that's the way you launder money. That's the way it's a very complex structure. So it's not just the bad guys and then the good guys here,
Yeah, and also, I mean, I'm not saying that it's true, but I would just say Lucy's opinion about narco-estado, like how the narco state works, in her understanding or in her explanation. Like, okay, let me remember. Like she said that. Sorry. No. I just need to remember. Like the interesting thing is that like how Mexico can work and how it can function as a country, like on many levels. Like all the money that they need for Mexico to function, it is founded from the narco income, and this is what it makes it so difficult to get away from the narco money, because this is how they operate actually the country. So obviously it should be like there could be a decision to say no to all this money, but it already became so comfortable for the economy to work in this way that they don't even want to change it.
And also, if somebody says no, then they get rid of him and put somebody that says yes.
Yeah.
Pretty much at all levels of government, from the local governments to the top.
Yeah. And I think maybe a couple of presidents ago, like the narco situation did exist, but it was kind of like a team, like a well thought out team between the long running party that was in power for like 72 years or whatever. El PRI and the narcotraficantes, they were like in well colluded, and there was some sort of not a truce, but there wasn't like a civil war like broken out. There was, like there was some laws, and there was like one leader of somebody there, one leader of somebody here. And then when this changed, I believe so, when it's the war on drugs started, and they got rid of kind of like the heads that were keeping everything in peace, and like this hydra effect happened, that many people that were under kind of wanted to be on top, and everybody that like the people that were the strongest, the most violent, were the ones that would keep on getting more and more power. And they kept on growing and growing, and then you started to get like this smaller cells, or like familias or something like this, getting more brutal and more brutal, intimidating worse and worse the other people, and it just like it's just yeah, it's like it's a
like it diversified in many groups. So pretty much.
Yeah, you have like, I don't know, like just like, I don't know, just in Michoacán, it's a big state, but like there you have like the Los Zetas, La Familia Michoacana. You have like so many, I don't know, like 3 or 4 like big gigantic ones, with the little smaller ones living in the like under them. And I think like, for instance, like Michoacán, because it has a big coastal side, coastal ground towards China, then whatever comes from China, they kind of like take it, they control it, and they can push it forward. Yeah.
And these realities probably happen in many other places, wherever there's drugs going through, there's probably some sort of economic very similar happening. The difference in Mexico is that when this very, gruesome agreement to benefit one of the cartels in the early 2008 with Calderon, with the President Calderon, came to be, that the killing of the main cartel leaders, plus all this investment that had been done to train the Mexican army. There's really well documented investigations of how the Zetas were founded by ex-military men, trained on torture and trained on by the, I don't want to say this, but trained by the US Army and the Mossad. And when you have deserters from the army with this knowledge, desensitized to be able to torture, and then you give them other type of power and control, and then you get into a war where whoever is more violent gets more power, it's just a turmoil. And once again, if this is not happening yet in other countries, it is probably happening in a more hidden way, in a less public way.
Can I just ask if you would have showcased this material in Mexico, actually, like in an exhibition or something, or people over there?
Yeah, we just, it was in 2022. We had an exhibition together with Alejandra and with some other ladies. And yeah, I did show it. No, in Mexico City, but also in Veracruz and Cordoba. At the Cordoba exhibition, I was not present, so I don't know what was the feedback. But at the Mexico City one, it was still very surprising to me, because in 2014 when Ayotzinapa happened, it was quite of a surprise for many in Mexico City that these sort of disappearings are happening so widespread. But still in 2022, people who came to that exhibition, and they obviously have, I think they've been more privileged ones, or I don't know very exactly, but they still didn't know that forced disappearances are so widespread. So
maybe super shortly, you should just explain Ayotzinapa, because I think they won't be familiar with the 43 people.
Are you?
Do you want to get into that?
But just really quick, so they know what she means when she talks about
like
In 2000.
yeah, so it was just an example. Like for me in 2014 became like very obvious how many mass graves do they have in Mexico, because I was taken to one as a photographer's assistant. So by the time it was not a very well-known fact, it was very natural. I mean, in smaller communities that they do have this sort of crimes against them, but it was, yeah, it was not like normal knowledge in Mexico City even. But by the time of 2022, I was pretty sure that people are very aware of it, but they still were not, actually. Even though how big this group is and how powerful they became by 22, it was like, I would say like 50-50 that people would know about these cases, even in Mexico. So, like for me, like with this work and with these informations, you can imagine how big of a question was how to be able to present it, or how much of understanding people would have, like, about it. Not that they should have any sort of understanding, but how can they decode any of these things from pictures like this. So.
Are you continuing, like, you're gonna do, like, is there a continuation project by any chance?
I mean, that would make a lot of sense, because they are not going to stop. Like, you are looking for someone who is not dead and not alive. So you are doing a circle, but what is never going to stop. I mean, I could do that, but I probably won't.
I covered a story in 2022 in another state called Sinaloa. There's another group of mothers doing similar work. And one of the mothers told me, I was asking from my experience in Juarez with the women disappearance, most families look for justice. They have a very clear message. We want a resolution. They're looking for the guilty people, trial, and justice. The process, the truth, which is also what Ayotzinapa is looking for. Ayotzinapa is 43 students that they were given from the army to the cartels by the order of someone in the government that nobody wants to say, but because there was an alleged drug, ¿cómo se dice? Cargamento de droga? There was a very big shipping of drugs in a bus where these kids were traveling in. It's a whole other subject. If you want to check it out, it's the 43 students of Ayotzinapa. And that is, it's such an emblematic example because it exemplifies how this relationship between army, drug cartels, and governments operate to disappear and make these big graves at some point. You know, it's just the example of how the actual operation of things happen. But many groups don't want justice anymore. They just want a body to pray to, you know? So this is what this lady told me. She said, for some of us, we don't even care who did this and why they did it. We just want a closure, right? And she said, because I am looking for two kids. One is involved in the death of the other one. You know, the family is looking for a kid that was for some reason involved in drug trafficking related stuff. And then that kid was involved in the disappearance of other kid. And these two families are looking for the body of both. So there's also a lot of risk trying to find the truth. So I don't want to sound too apocalyptic here, but I was reading something. If this continues to be a common dynamic in the world where we are seeing what is happening regarding occupation of land, people are just stepping on top of international law, local laws. There's an ungovernance, you know, that is happening in Mexico. I urge people to not think that this is just a reality that is in Mexico. It's happening in a different level everywhere. It is happening in Ukraine, it is happening in Israel, in Palestine, and it's happening in many other places where laws, agreements are just being stepped upon to appropriate land. And I was reading recently by a very interesting writer, if you want to check her out, Rita Segato, she's an Argentinian feminist, that we are entering, we're not in the late state of capitalism, we're entering a new feudal state where there's lords, there's landlords, and everybody living in their land is subjugated to them. And in a way, the way these occupations and this control of territories happen resemble that, instead of or maybe a new way, a new feudal dynamic in relationship to capitalism. So I always urge people to understand that the reality Mexico is facing is not isolated. It is happening in a different way, in different levels, in different parts of the world, and might eventually reach us all at some point. Here. So yeah.
And yeah, that's a very, very, very important point what Alejandra says, I think. And also I've been trying to make these points in my pictures, like that it is also the matter of the land. And yeah.
It's absurd quite how obsolete this stuff is. Like, this is the religion and politics, and we're still struggling with it. Like, you know, it's 2024, I'm still fighting about it. We just had elections here in Mexico. It's like we're not smart enough to kind of like go past this situation that's like recurring worldwide, and I don't think we're going to be smart enough to do it. I think, you know, like, I think sharing, it's constantly repeating everywhere, as you said, and the only way that we approach all these realities is like looking at them through like Instagram stories and blah blah, and we're like so desensitized from everything that, like, you can show us an Instagram story and then the next one is like a little puppy and then a girl in a bikini, and you just like keep on scrolling through, and it doesn't hit us anymore. I think we just have to like sense reality in a different way that's not through our eyes, and until we do that, I think I don't know.
So what about the new Prime Minister? Isn't she going to be different? I'm not really sure. I'm just asking. Like, I just saw that like there's.
She actually denies like the feminicides. She's also part of the whole denying thing that, you know, this
Denying what?
feminicidios, like
Feminicides is a term to call gender-based murders. Femicides, yeah. Well, I don't think she has straightforward denied it. Neither the formal president AMLO. There's certain numbers out there, you know. For example, they say that in Mexico there's 60,000 people disappeared, and they insist that is not the number. And in my opinion, they are stuck in that argument, you know. They don't want to address the issue. They don't want to provide any solutions to it. And I do want to have some hope, honestly, because these people seem to have a different understanding of how Mexico should be governed. But at the same time, if they don't acknowledge this reality, I don't think they have enough time or a well-formed structure as a party to make the structural changes that they need to happen to make this reality go away. Because this is what I think they intend to do. You know, there's scholarships for all young kids in Mexico, everybody. because he thinks that this is the way he's going to keep the kids out of drug trafficking related things, you know. If I give a scholarship for each kid in the country, to each teenager, they won't get into drug trafficking, you know.
But
So-
you also have to think that Mexico, like the level of analphabetismo compared to like Europe, it's gigantic. Not so many people. That's horrible. I think, for instance, it really brings it doesn't allow people to reach out as far and kind of like closes their reach, intellectual reach to like a.
But I remind you that only last year there was an education reform for textbooks and to make sure that because Mexico has been in a long process of privatization of education. This is why a lot of kids no longer have access to school, to basics levels of school. The process of privatization is in the way you neglect the public schools and force people into going into private schools to provide for a better education for your children. So what's going to happen to the ones that cannot pay private school? They're going to be stuck with public school. But you know what? My mom is a public school teacher. She taught public school, elementary school all her life. And I know all the lack of resources they have had throughout their life and the misery of...
And this was, let's say, like in a major city. And think about, you know, like somebody that lives all the way up in the mountain. Like
Yeah.
it's how do they reach? And
Those
you're talking about
teachers-
one of the 10 biggest cities in the country or something like this. You know, like Ciudad Juárez is like a big city. It's a proper metropolis. But imagine, you know, like a little town that, you know, like has very few kids. And their parents don't read either. Then, you know, like they can't reach education. And I think that's, I'm not saying that, you know, like, yeah, it's just, the education is going to give you bliss, but at least it starts giving you the tools to be able to see past the reality that they're surrounded by.
Yeah, I do think that, but I mean, we can have that I don't know if this is just another whole subject, but yeah. If you have any questions, please let us know.
That's maybe a more positive note to end on. Yeah, guys. Like, is there, for example, sorry, this last question, like, is there like international support, for example, for this woman? You know, like, I don't know, like international organizations which are also kind of not interfering, but like helping all this, like, let's say, war areas. Are they helping, or can they get help? You know, like.
I guess there might be some support. I'm not really aware of it, but it's not as romanticized as, for instance, when there was the, I don't know, EZLN. It was like a movement in the '94, and that had like a gigantic romanticism around it. So it had like, you know, like a lot of money put in from the outside. And I guess like this situation, I don't, as far as I know, I don't think they're getting like so much money pushed from like the foreign countries, or are they? I really don't know.
Like oddly enough, these ladies are getting some support. Like the Veracruz ones, they do have access to public psychiatrists, like given them from the government, from the side of the government. It's like there is access, but like once in a month or something like that. But the biggest thing what they provide to them is like education in forensic studies, which is like teaching them how to excavate.
I mean, many of these groups are, how do you call it, are se autogestionan. They fund their own work through, as Adél said, their own work. But some of them, when they have access to the understanding how to apply to funds from international organizations, you know, international organizations that support women's groups, how do you call it, human rights struggles. Some come from the UN, some come from, I don't know, international rescue. There's a lot of organizations that have a way for groups to access resources by applying to those resources. And many of those do that, but I'm not sure if this particular group has done that, but groups I know from in my hometown do that to find resources.
Actually, why are some of the pictures colored red? Maybe it's an obvious thing, but
Yeah, it's more like photographical decision. Like, Veracruz is in the. Okay, you know me, Lucia. Anyways, I really love to do lighting, no? All my pictures. But in the desert, it's kind of difficult to use flash during the daytime. So I've been just looking for some other type of modification of light. And actually, this is like a physical red filter on a color film that I use when it's direct sunlight. So.
it's not like a symbolic, but more like an aesthetic.
Yeah, of course it was symbolic and aesthetic, and it has like many useful areas in my understanding, at least, because when I turned it to monochrome, it becomes like a very flat black and white picture, so it like works a little bit differently than other kind of black and white pictures.
In the interviews that you wanted to use, there was this woman talking about the red in the Mexican flag, and that it's like so much blood of all the children and everything. And I think that's usually what the red in the flags means, but I guess the Mexican flag also has red.
Yeah, I mean it's a risky choice because of course it has relation to blood, like I mean.
Or heat.
Yeah, to heat, to many things, like to flash, or I mean like actual human flash, or whatever. I mean I started to use it like before this series, so it was more like an aesthetic journey into how I can intervene with the land when it's like very far away and I cannot light it. To be quite honest.
Yeah. And I think this is like a big statement that this is not photojournalism, but this is rather an artistic view on the situation. No?
It's trying to convey some situation to others, like, or even to myself, like trying to make sense of this situation. And yeah, I mean, this is not photojournalism per se, I would say. And also this creates a lot of questions, as I said, like what is the, like, what way it could pass to people when, of course, mainly it reaches the people from the art scene, but maybe it's like it would be a useful information for many others as well. Not as I'm saying that like, oh my God, this is such a great work. No, I mean information-wise, I'm saying these critics, and of course I think it's a big question in the photographic industry, how we should handle all these situations and how we should mediate, like as photographers, in these like very sensitive topics nowadays. Because there is also responsibility how we stand behind the camera, what we say, how do we act, how do we interact with these people, because they are going to remember us. I mean, if I ask them too many times what happened with you, then I'm going to re-traumatize them. I cannot do that. I mean, I can, but I won't. And, all these kind of sectors and like little details which are important, I mean, they are just important.
I mean, there's so many ethical decisions that must be made in the process, that sometimes it's difficult to find creative liberty in that. And I do recognize that, because this color, I see it in Adél's earliest work. And if you ask me, because you invited me to give my opinion, I do think it's risky, as you mentioned, because red, it can be associated to a very scandalous color. And this project, to the contrary, takes the project to a more intimate level rather than that. But I do think that I like the way it's an obvious intervention of the artist. So you cannot deny that this is just the view of one person and her particular perspective. I mean, I would reconsider if red was the color, you know, although I do like the way you make it flat, like you say, without having to use black and white, because black and white is also too. But I also do think that Adele had a very particular view in her work. There's some eeriness to her work, some like something hidden, like a mystery hidden in things that I do find in her work, like como algo, ¿cómo se dice en inglés? Algo, ay no sé, macabro, no como. No, like an eeriness. I don't know how to translate this. Like something mysterious in these landscapes, you know, that it's not quite your picture perfect landscape because something is happening there. So this sort of uncomfortableness that these landscapes, which are not your typical landscapes, make you feel, I do think that adds to the way of trying to add up and represent this very uncomfortable feeling that all violence should make us feel, you know? I think it's my opinion, but it's your decisions.